So now we can go to Rami Khouri, who's a distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut, who's joining us live from Boston. Rami Khouri, thank you so much always for joining us and giving us your thoughts. This is a region that you are incredibly familiar with, that you are an expert on. You spend, of course, a lot of time as well in Beirut. You have done. What do you make of this latest raid that has happened on the Al Jazeera bureau in occupied West Bank? And again, a reminder for our viewers that are just joining in, this is a 45-day banning of Al Jazeera, which now would indicate and would mean that none of the Al Jazeera, whether it's English or Arabic or Mubashir, journalists or online, of course, because we also have members of our teams that work for the digital website as well and our digital outlets, none of them at this rate will be able to operate at all on this story. What do you make of this?
This is very much in line with the whole policy of not only the State of Israel since 1948, which is to prevent real news about Palestinians or about what the State of Israel is doing to Palestinians, colonizing them and arresting them and torturing them and things like that. They've tried to prevent that news from coming out, and they've generally succeeded for the last 40, 50 years. Their whole strategy in Israel is to produce a narrative about Israel, about Palestinians, about Zionism, about the Arab-Israeli conflict, about terrorism, about all of these issues that are swirling around the region. And that narrative says that the Israelis are good guys, and the Palestinians and the Arabs and Muslims are bad guys, and they're a threat. And this is a narrative that the Israelis have succeeded in disseminating all over the world. And the primary mechanism they've used has been the mass media, the Western mainstream mass media. That includes well-known companies like CNN and BBC and the New York Times, and the top names in the media have all been used generally willingly, to an extent, have been used by Israel to paint an inaccurate picture of the Palestinians and of Israel. And the recent transition in the world to digital media and social media has created a great upheaval in this Israeli strategy, because the social media that has now really developed heavily all over the world, and particularly recently TikTok, which is prevalent among young people, and Instagram and things like that, have produced knowledge on the ground by Palestinians and Arabs, Lebanese and others, all over the Middle East, as well as in the Western world, where Palestinians are banned from teaching at a school, for instance, or are forbidden to hold an event. There's social media there that presents this in real time. So the Israelis are rather perplexed and desperate to figure out how do they keep the world believing the lies and exaggerations and distortions that they produce. And they do this mainly by saying Jazeera supports Hamas, supports terrorism. This is their main line, or is anti-Semitic. Those are the two main arguments that they've used. They've always forbidden the international community, anybody in the world, to come in and investigate a controversial issue, like the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, for instance, or others. They refuse to have the international community, impartial, credible people, come in and do an investigation. They say they do their own investigation, and they almost always say that the person died by accident, or that Israel had nothing to do with it. And so this latest suspension of the Ramallah Bureau, the Palestine Bureau of Jazeera for 45 days is very much in line with the policies that Israel has used in Palestine now during the Gaza genocide. They stopped Jazeera from broadcasting out of Israel a couple of months ago, and now they're stopping them to broadcast in Palestine. And this is really really concerning because it probably means that there's going to be a bigger onslaught of Israeli Zionist, militant, fascist, settler violence all over the West Bank. And the primary instrument for informing the world about what Israel is doing is not going to be available to do it. But that's not going to stop the world from knowing what's going on because of the hundreds of brave Palestinian journalists, some other foreign journalists who are there. There's still foreign journalists in the West Bank and in Israel. They're not allowed to go into Gaza. And I would predict that soon the Israelis will make the West Bank a forbidden zone. They won't allow foreign journalists to go in there.
And Rami, it's also worth letting our viewers know. I mean, many understand, those that follow the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories, they see this as an occupation, but don't realize the little nuances, if you like. So as a person, you were saying about banning people potentially from entering occupied West Bank, certainly in terms of journalists. Already when you arrive at occupied West Bank, you have massive signs in red, huge texts warning tourists, warning anyone from entering the occupied West Bank under the pretext of it being a dangerous area and that they need to maintain people's safety. And certainly that's the first question you are asked on arrival in Israel by the airport through passport control as to whether you have any plans on visiting occupied West Bank. But you are now in Boston, you are in the US. I just want to talk about the US role in all of this, because when Israel first banned Al Jazeera and shut our office down, banned us from broadcasting in Israel, when the US State Department was asked and questioned on the Israeli move, they called it quite concerning. I mean, they have spoken on record, spoken to us, spoken to Al Jazeera and said they have no problems at all and they don't see what the issue is with our coverage, that, we interview them. But what does quite concerning mean? And does that have any effect on the decision-making in Israel? Would Israel even listen to the US? Is that even enough pressure to just say it's quite concerning, especially when the US says it advocates for press freedom?
Right. So the United States State Department does a lot of serious things in the world. It doesn't do any serious things in the Israeli-Palestinian problem or conflict. And the spokespeople follow the old adage that sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. So they say things that sound good, but will not have any impact on anybody. It's really terrible, the contradiction, the hypocrisy, double standards, lying sometimes, and duplicity of the American State Department spokespeople. There are good people in the State Department. I've known many of them over the years. There's some outstanding people, but the outstanding people don't make policy. The people who make policy are also not in the State Department. They're in the White House and in the Congress. That's where the power is. So the American overall policy to the issue of freedom of press and Jazeera, etc., similar to the issue of Israel trying to demonize UNRWA. So UNRWA's situation is similar to the media. Israel wants to ban it, and it calls it that it's helping Hamas, and comes up with all these reasons that are not valid and are actually investigated by impartial UN people, finding that the overwhelming majority of what Israel accuses UNRWA of is not true. For instance, there's all these accusations all the time about the anti-Semitic textbooks of UNRWA. There used to be textbooks years ago that had some anti-Semitic stuff in it, but that was dealt with years ago. So textbooks of UNRWA have been very heavily studied by independent European and international groups and saying that they're fine. But this is the Israeli policy. The United States goes along with virtually everything that Israel wants to do in Palestine. The only place where the U.S. seemed to push a little bit of a pause button on Israel's action was a couple of years ago when Israel started to end with it, when this fascist right-wing militant Zionist government came into power in Israel, when it started taking actions that looked like it was going to formally annex all the West Bank, like it annexed East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. The U.S. moved a little bit more diligently to hold Israel back a little bit because there was a massive outpouring of opposition to this policy. And the U.S. knew that it would be hurt if Israel went ahead and did this. But the truth is that there is, the American president and vice president and others say there's no daylight between Israel and the U.S. They mean that in the sense that the U.S. will always support Israel and protect it. But it also, there's no daylight also means that the policies of Israel and the policies of the United States or the sentiments of the United States are essentially identical. And it's beyond doubt now with the 11 months that we've seen now of the Gaza situation and the many years of activities that Israel has undertaken, there's no doubt that the United States is not serious about a two-state solution. It's not serious about Palestinian self-determination. It says these things. It says these things all the time, but it's not serious. It's not telling the truth. Or it just says them, but it has no intention of following up on them. And this is a form of racism and apartheid as well, where it gives these nice phrases to these Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians and these dark people in the South. Yeah, we're for two states and we're for self-determination, but it has no intention of ever doing that. So this is all part of a cycle that's getting more and more vicious now and more worrying.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.